best friend manipulated me, weaponized lies to destroy me, and had me interrogated by the police. So I turned the entire system she used against her and pulled an Uno reverse. I was terrified the day I transferred to my new school. I had moved around a lot because of my dad's job and gotten used to being the quiet new kid. I usually kept my head down, did my drawings in the back of class, and counted down the days till I moved again. I never expected anything else. But then I met Zoe. Zoe was the kind of girl you noticed even if you didn't want to. Loud in the way that pulled you in, confident without trying, the type that teachers gave more leniency to because she was spirited. She sat next to me at lunch my second day and called out some guys who were mocking the way I ate my sandwich. Then she turned to me with this smile like she'd just done something casual, like standing up for someone was just what she did. I didn't know it yet, but that moment changed everything. Zoe made it easy to fall into her world. She liked my art, or at least she said she did. She told me I was talented and said I needed to get out of my own head. She invited me to hang out after school, and slowly I stopped drawing alone in my room. My parents noticed and thought it was good I was making friends. I thought so too. The first red flag was Lucas. He was this sweet kid who'd been friendly since day one, always offered to carry my stuff, always asked how I was doing. One day Zoe leaned in and whispered, "He's obsessed with you. He doesn't like that we're close." After that, I sort of pulled away from him. She said he was jealous, and I believed her. I wish I hadn't. Zoe started borrowing things. First pencils, then sketchbooks. Then she asked for cash because her card wasn't working. I didn't think anything of it until I realized she never gave anything back. She also stopped asking and just started taking. Then she started asking for help with homework. Not like, "Can you explain this?" but "Can you just do it for me real quick?" And I did. I thought I owed her something. Things got weirder when she started posting my sketches online with her name on them. I told her I didn't like it, and she rolled her eyes and said I was being petty. "It's just social media," she said. "Relax." But the more I pulled away, the harder she pulled me back. She said I was being selfish, that I didn't understand what real friendship meant. She started lying. She told people Lucas had tried to kiss her, and when I didn't believe her, she said I was choosing him over her. She made up stuff about my parents too, said they didn't love me the way they said they did, said I was a burden and they were just pretending. It got in my head. She was everywhere. She'd text me nonstop. If I didn't answer right away, she'd send guilt trips. If I did answer, she'd somehow turn every conversation into a lecture or a joke at my expense. The night it really broke was after she convinced me to skip my dad's birthday dinner. She said we'd just hang out, but she took me to a party and ditched me the second we got there. I didn't even know most of the people. I left early and walked home in the rain. When I told her how messed up it was, she laughed and said I needed to toughen up. After that, things spiraled. She flirted with this guy I had told her I liked, then told me to cheat on a test for her, and when we got caught, she denied everything. My parents grounded me and didn't believe my side. My teacher looked disappointed in me. Zoe told everyone I was losing it, said I needed therapy and wasn't safe to be around. Lucas tried to talk to me, said he had proof Zoe was lying. I didn't want to hear it. I was too deep in it. I hated that part of myself, the part that still wanted Zoe to like me even after everything. Then Zoe said I laid hands on her. She showed up at school with fake bruises and claimed I sent her threatening texts. The school suspended me. The police got involved. My parents lost clients at their business because of the rumors. I stopped eating. I stopped drawing. I honestly stopped caring. Lucas didn't give up though. He found this girl who went to Zoe's old school. Same story, same destruction. Ms. Rivera, our art teacher, found Zoe's sketchbook in the supply room. It had practice signatures in my handwriting. There were notes written like they were from me, but weren't. Then they found the security footage from the night Zoe said I attacked her. I wasn't even there. Turns out Zoe had taken selfies of herself doing the bruises with makeup. She just forgot to delete them. When she got caught, she looked me in the eye and said she envied me, my art, my family, everything. She said watching me break was her masterpiece. But what she didn't know was that I had a plan. I didn't want Zoe to have the satisfaction of thinking she'd broken me. So the minute I walked away from that final confrontation, I started putting my plan into action. First thing I did was call Lucas. I needed someone who'd believe me without question. We met up at the park near my house, the one with those old wooden benches behind the playground where no one ever goes. Lucas looked worried when I showed up, kept glancing around like he expected Zoe to jump out from behind a tree. I dumped everything that had happened, watching his face go from concern to straight up angry when I told him what Zoe had said about breaking me being her masterpiece. Lucas immediately pulled out his phone, scrolled through some old messages, then showed me a name and number I didn't recognize. "You need to talk to Emma," he said. Apparently Emma had transferred to our school district last year after some drama at her old school. Drama involving Zoe. I hesitated for a second, wondering if this could be another trap, but Lucas had never lied to me before. I texted Emma right there, asking to meet somewhere private. She suggested the public library the next day, and I agreed even though the thought of revealing all this stuff to a stranger made my stomach hurt. That night, I barely slept. Just kept replaying Zoe's cold confession in my head while making notes in a fresh notebook I'd hidden under my mattress. The next day, I got to the library 20 minutes early and grabbed a study room in the back. Lucas showed up first, giving me a quick side hug before sitting down. When Emma walked in, I immediately noticed how jumpy she seemed, eyes darting around the room, checking behind her before closing the door. She was pretty in a quiet way, with these nervous hands that kept adjusting her hair. Lucas made the introductions, and for a minute we just sat there in awkward silence. Emma stared at her hands, clearly uncomfortable, until Lucas gently prompted her to share her story. What came out next felt like listening to someone narrate my own life. Emma described how Zoe had befriended her when she was new, made her feel special, then slowly isolated her from other friends. She talked about Zoe borrowing art supplies and never returning them, asking for money, even stealing some of Emma's paintings and claiming them as her own online. My mouth literally dropped open when Emma pulled out her phone and showed me Instagram posts from over a year ago. They could have been my exact drawings, just with different subjects. Emma's voice got really shaky when she described how Zoe had eventually turned on her, telling everyone Emma was obsessed with her, even reporting her for stalking. No one had believed Emma's side because Zoe was so convincing, so well liked by teachers and other students. Emma's parents parents had eventually transferred her to our district just to escape the situation. I sat there in shock, listening to this girl describe the exact same tactics I'd been through. It was like Zoe had a playbook she followed with targets. When Emma finished talking, she looked exhausted, like reliving it all had physically drained her. I thanked her for sharing and promised I wouldn't let Zoe get away with doing this to anyone else. Armed with this knowledge, I headed home with a clearer plan. First thing I needed was evidence, concrete proof that couldn't be dismissed as, she said. I dug through my phone, looking for old texts from Zoe, but discovered she'd been smart. Many of the most damning messages had mysteriously disappeared. I couldn't prove she'd deleted them, but it seemed suspicious. So I started a new approach, documenting everything in real time. I bought a small voice recorder and started keeping it in my pocket whenever I knew I'd be around Zoe. I set up automatic cloud backups of all texts and social media messages. I started a detailed journal with times, dates, and exact quotes. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. This was about stopping Zoe's modus operandi. The next day at school, I cautiously approached Ms. Rivera, my art teacher who had discovered Zoe's notebook with forged signatures. She listened carefully as I explained what I'd learned from Emma, her face getting more concerned with each detail. When I finished, she sighed and explained she was limited in what she could do without more concrete evidence. School protocols meant she couldn't directly accuse a student based on suspicions, but she suggested I continue documenting everything and promised to keep a closer eye on the situation from her position. She also mentioned she'd noticed some inconsistencies in Zoe's artwork submissions recently, but hadn't had enough proof to act on her concerns. I left Ms. Rivera's classroom feeling slightly better. At least one adult believed me. When I got home that afternoon, I decided it was time to come clean to my parents. They'd been walking on eggshells around me since the whole suspension thing, clearly unsure what to believe. I found them in the kitchen and asked for a family meeting. Dad looked surprised but turned off the TV while Mom put down her work laptop. I took a deep breath and started from the beginning, explaining Zoe's manipulation, the stolen artwork, the false assault claims, and finally, what I'd learned from Emma. At first, they seemed skeptical. I could see it in their exchanged glances. Mom even interrupted at one point to ask why I hadn't told them sooner. I pulled out my phone and showed them Emma's social media from a year ago, then my own artwork that Zoe had posted recently under her name. The similarities were too obvious to ignore. I watched as their expressions shifted from doubt to shock to anger. Dad started talking about calling Zoe's parents immediately, while Mom mentioned lawyers and the school board. I quickly jumped in, explaining that a direct confrontation would only make Zoe more dangerous. She was smart and calculating. If cornered, she'd just find a more convincing way to paint me as the villain. I convinced them to let me handle it my way, methodically building evidence while they focused on damage control for their business, which had been suffering from the rumors. My parents reluctantly agreed, but insisted on being kept in the loop. With my parents on board, I turned my attention to rebuilding some of the friendships I'd ghosted under Zoe's influence. This proved harder than expected. I texted Reese from my biology class, asking if he wanted to partner on the upcoming lab. His response was cold, saying he'd already found a partner. When I approached Jennifer after English, she made an excuse about being late for her next class. The rumors about my mental breakdown had clearly spread further than I'd realized. I decided to take a different approach, starting with small gestures rather than diving right back into friendships. I left an encouraging note in William's locker before his big swim meet. I shared my chemistry notes with Dakota when she missed class. Baby steps, but it was something. The real breakthrough came completely by accident. I was in the school bathroom during lunch period when I heard Zoe's voice coming from the main area. I quickly ducked into a stall, not ready for a confrontation. Zoe walked in with Taylor, her apparent new best friend, and started talking about me. I held my breath as Zoe casually mentioned how she'd made up the whole assault story just to teach me a lesson for not appreciating her friendship. I frantically fumbled for my phone, managed to hit record, and captured about 2 minutes of Zoe badmouthing me and laughing about how everyone had believed her over me. When they finally left, my hands were shaking with a mix of anger and vindication. I had actual proof. My excitement quickly faded when I did some research and discovered that recording someone without their consent wasn't legally admissible as evidence in our state. Despite this, I knew the recording could still be valuable in convincing others of the truth, even if it couldn't be used in any official capacity. What was even more disturbing was hearing how she was already starting the same cycle with Taylor, borrowing things, creating small debts, making subtle comments about Taylor's other friends. I sat in that bathroom stall long after Zoe and Taylor had left, watching history begin to repeat itself, and knowing I needed to move faster before another person got hurt. After learning about what I'd heard in the bathroom, I decided I needed to carefully plan my approach to warning Taylor. I thought about how Zoe had twisted my words in the past, so I knew a direct approach could backfire spectacularly. Instead, I needed to be strategic. I'd show Taylor Zoe's technique rather than just telling her about it. I spent that evening sketching out a detailed plan in my hidden notebook, thinking through every possible way Zoe might react and counter it. This wasn't just about exposing Zoe anymore. It was about breaking her systematic method of controlling people before she could hurt someone else. The next morning, I deliberately left my special charcoal pencils, the ones I'd mentioned were a gift from my grandmother, in the art room after class, making sure Taylor noticed them. I even commented on how much they meant to me as we packed up. During lunch, I casually mentioned to Lucas that I'd forgotten my pencils, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Just as I predicted, by afternoon art class, my pencils had mysteriously appeared in Zoe's supply case. When I spotted them, I calmly walked over and said, "Oh, there are my grandmother's pencils." I was looking everywhere for them, the way Zoe smoothly claimed I'd asked her to. Hold them for safekeeping was masterful. She didn't miss a beat, but I noticed Taylor watching the interaction with newfound interest, especially when Zoe seemed reluctant to actually hand them back. The seed of doubt had been planted. After class, Taylor approached me with questions about the pencils. I was careful careful not to directly accuse Zoe of anything, just shared that this had happened before with other items. Taylor mentioned that Zoe had borrowed her favorite bracelet last week and hadn't returned it despite several reminders. I simply nodded and said, "That's interesting," letting Taylor draw her own conclusions. The next day, Zoe was absent, and Taylor sat with me at lunch. She had more questions about my history with Zoe, and I answered honestly but cautiously. By the end of lunch, Taylor's expression had shifted from skepticism to concern as she recognized Zoe's strategy in her own experiences. I invited her to meet Emma after school, thinking hearing from another victim might help solidify what Taylor was beginning to see for herself. Taylor agreed, and that afternoon we met Emma at the local coffee shop. As Emma shared her story, I watched Taylor's face change, recognition, then shock, then anger flashing across her features. She kept interrupting with, "She did the exact same thing to me." When Emma showed her the stolen artwork posts, Taylor pulled out her phone and showed us how Zoe had recently posted a poem Taylor had written, passing it off as her own work. The three of us spent hours comparing notes, identifying the exact same manipulation tactics Zoe had used on each of us. When we finally left the coffee shop, Taylor seemed both shaken and relieved. She thanked me repeatedly for helping her see what was happening before things escalated further. I felt a wave of satisfaction knowing I'd broken Zoe's cycle with at least one potential victim. The next day, I decided to take a more aggressive approach to building my case. I needed something concrete that school administrators couldn't dismiss. I thought carefully about how to use my artwork as bait, something Zoe wouldn't be able to resist taking. That night, I created a detailed drawing that subtly incorporated elements that symbolized manipulation and control. Nothing obvious enough to be called harassment, but meaningful to anyone who knew our history. In addition to my signature, I added a nearly invisible security mark in the corner, a tiny pattern that I could later prove was my deliberate artist's mark. I photographed the drawing from multiple angles with timestamps, saved digital copies to the cloud, and printed backup copies that I stored at home. The next day, I deliberately left the drawing in my portfolio during art class, making sure to step away from my desk several times, creating opportunities for it to be taken. I casually mentioned to a classmate how proud I was of this particular piece, knowing word would get back to Zoe. Sure enough, by the end of the day, the drawing had disappeared from my portfolio. I made a show of looking for it, asking several classmates if they'd seen it, but carefully avoided confronting Zoe directly. We didn't have to wait long for Zoe to take the bait. That Sunday evening, she posted her newest creation on Instagram. The image was unmistakably my drawing, though she'd added some color and cropped out my signature. Most importantly, she'd completely erased my security mark, proof that she knew she was stealing and deliberately removing evidence of the original artist. We immediately took screenshots and documented everything. Lucas suggested we hold off confronting her directly. We needed to make sure school administration saw this clear evidence of theft and fraudulent behavior first. Monday morning, my parents contacted the principal and requested an urgent meeting, referencing clear evidence of academic dishonesty that couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding. The principal agreed to meet with us after school. Lucas, Emma, and Taylor all offered to come with me for support, but I decided having too many people might make it seem like we were ganging up on Zoe. Instead, I asked Lucas to help me organize all our documentation into a clear chronological presentation that even the most skeptical administrator couldn't ignore. The meeting with the principal started tense but professional. My parents presented the evidence of my stolen artwork first, the original time-stamped photos, Zoe's modified version online, and documentation of my security mark that had been deliberately removed. The principal seemed genuinely concerned, especially when my parents showed him Emma's nearly identical experience from the previous year. Just as the meeting was wrapping up, there was a knock at the door. It was Ms. Rivera, who apologized for interrupting, but explained she had relevant information. She described how she'd been monitoring Zoe's artwork more closely since our previous conversation, and had noticed other pieces that seemed suspiciously similar to other students' styles. The principal thanked her for the information and promised a thorough investigation. He asked me to keep the situation confidential while they looked into it. The next morning, I was called back to the principal's office. Zoe was already there with her parents, looking completely unworried. Her father, a corporate lawyer like mine, immediately dominated the conversation, suggesting this was just a misunderstanding between teenagers being blown out of proportion. The principal calmly presented the evidence we'd provided, the time-stamped original artwork, the security mark, and Zoe's modified version online. Zoe's expression didn't change as she claimed I was copying her style, and must have created my version after seeing hers online. Her perfect composure cracked only when the principal mentioned the recording from the bathroom, though it wasn't legally admissible as evidence in court. He explained it was certainly relevant for an internal school investigation. Zoe's face went pale, and she glanced at her parents with genuine fear for the first time. Her father demanded to hear this alleged recording, and when the principal played it, the room went completely silent. Zoe's voice was unmistakable as she laughed about making up the assault allegations and mentioned how easy it was to manipulate people into believing her over me. Her mother gasped, and her father's professional demeanor slipped as he asked Zoe if that was really her voice. Zoe's carefully constructed facade finally crumbled. She started crying, claiming the recording was taken out of context, that she was just venting after I'd been so mean to her. But the damage was done. Her parents could hear the truth in her voice, the casual cruelty as she'd laughed about ruining my reputation. The principal explained that given the evidence, Zoe would be suspended immediately pending further investigation into all the allegations. He suggested her parents seek counseling for her and made it clear that depending on the investigation's findings, more serious consequences might follow. As Zoe and her parents left the office, her mother looked back at me with this confused, apologetic expression that made my heart hurt for her. She'd believed in her daughter completely, never imagining the manipulation Zoe was capable of. The principal asked me to stay behind briefly, He apologized for not addressing the situation sooner and explained they'd be reviewing all the evidence more thoroughly to determine appropriate consequences. He also mentioned that several other students had come forward with similar experiences after hearing about the investigation. For the first time in months, I walked through the school hallways without looking over my shoulder. News traveled fast. By lunch period, everyone knew Zoe had been suspended. People who'd been avoiding me suddenly wanted to sit at our table asking for details. I kept it simple, not wanting to turn this into some gossip fest. Some people apologized for believing Zoe's stories about me, while others acted like they'd been on my side all along. I didn't really care either way. I was just glad the truth was finally out. Zoe's 2-week suspension turned into a recommendation for transfer to another school after the administration finished their investigation. They found evidence of multiple instances of academic dishonesty, harassment, and bullying involving several students. My parents considered pressing charges for theft and defamation, but ultimately decided against it after consulting with Barbara, our family attorney. She explained that while we had a strong case, legal proceedings would drag out the situation for months or even years, forcing me to repeatedly relive the trauma. Instead, we focused on moving forward. The experience had changed me fundamentally. I'd never been particularly outspoken before, but watching Zoe systematically target and isolate vulnerable people had awakened something in me. With Ms. Rivera's encouragement, I started a small support group at school for students who had experienced bullying or toxic friendships. Taylor, Emma, and I worked together to create a safe space where people could share their experiences without judgment. The group grew quickly, proving how many students were dealing with similar situations in silence. Running the group meant becoming more visible when I'd spent years trying to stay in the background, but I discovered I was stronger than I'd realized. My parents noticed the change in me too. Dad mentioned over dinner one night how proud he was of how I'd handled everything. "You didn't just survive it," he said. "You're helping other people survive it too." Those words meant more to me than he probably realized. During spring break, Lucas suggested I channel the experience into my artwork. I started a series of pieces exploring themes of manipulation, resilience, and reclaiming personal power. The work was raw and honest in a way my previous art hadn't been. Ms. Rivera encouraged me to submit the series to a local art competition, and to my shock, I won second place. The judge specifically commented on the emotional depth and authenticity of the pieces. When senior year rolled around, I felt like a completely different person from the quiet, invisible girl who had started at this school. I had real friends who had seen me at my worst and stood by me anyway. I'd found my voice and learned how to use it to help others. Most importantly, I'd discovered that my quiet nature wasn't a weakness to be exploited. It was a strength that had allowed me to observe, plan, and ultimately reclaim my story. A month before graduation, I received a message request from Zoe. She was at her new school now but wanted to clear the air before we all went off to college. I stared at the message for a long time, tempted to ignore it completely. But curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown, a public place with plenty of witnesses. Lucas insisted on coming with me, sitting at a nearby table just in case. When Zoe walked in, she looked smaller somehow, less intimidating than I remembered. She sat across from me and launched into what sounded like a rehearsed apology, talking about therapy and personal growth, and how she now understood her actions were inappropriate. I listened without interrupting, searching her face for any sign of genuine remorse. When she finished, I simply asked, "Why did you do it?" She seemed startled by the direct question, her practiced speech forgotten. After a long pause, she admitted that seeing my talent, my family, my potential, had made her feel insignificant. "Breaking you was easier than improving myself," she said quietly. It wasn't a justification, just a sad truth. I didn't forgive her. Some things go beyond forgiveness, but I thanked her for her honesty and wished her well with her therapy. As I walked away, I realized I felt nothing but pity for her. She'd once seemed so powerful, so threatening, but now she just looked like a troubled girl who couldn't stand seeing light in others. On graduation day, I walked across the stage to receive my diploma with my head held high. My parents cheered embarrassingly loud, and my friends waited with hugs at the bottom of the steps. The girl who had entered this school hoping to remain invisible was leaving as someone who had found her voice, her strength, and her people. That fall, I headed off to college with a hard-earned wisdom about human nature and a portfolio of work that had genuine emotional depth. I sometimes think about what Zoe said that day in the art room, about breaking me being her masterpiece. She had no idea that her greatest achievement would ultimately be the catalyst for my transformation, or that in trying to destroy me, she'd only revealed my true resilience. In the end, her scheme had failed not because I was smarter or stronger, but because I refused to let someone else define my worth or control my story.